Hi, hello everybody. So, as a lot of you may know, Estela and Umeko are going to be coming out with the new season tomorrow, as expected. However, I do think that there are some things that people may not be considering when it comes to the hype of the new characters that are coming out. So in this video, I'm going to detail some important information that you would probably like to know before you pull for either of these units. However, before we get into that small update, I did mess up in my previous video when I said Chiaroscuro procs Unrelenting Evolution. It was an error in my testing. When I equipped Unrelenting Evolution to see if it granted an additional damage buff, and because I was using Sympathetic Evolution as a way to gauge whether or not I had a damage resistance buff applied or not, and when I equipped Chiaroscuro and then Unrelenting Evolution, equipping Unrelenting Evolution increased my perk power, which increased my damage, and that led me to believe that Chiaroscuro was actually proccing Unrelenting Evolution when that was not the case. However, I will say that Unrelenting Subgravity, I did test multiple times again this morning, and Unrelenting Subgravity is still proccing Unrelenting Evolution, and they both proc Sympathetic Evolution. I'll say again, I'm still very new to this content creation stuff, I'm still very new to testing, so there will be some mistakes, but I will be making sure to amend them as best as I can. For the most up-to-date information on my own artifact testing and build crafting, be sure to refer to the spreadsheet rather than any video that I put out. But back to the main topic, from the beta, we know a lot about both of these characters' kits. Estela is going to be a damaged character, an offense character who uses multiple summons on the field and will largely rely on her own abilities for her damage, as her weapon mastery, at least in the beta, was ability damage rather than weapon damage. However, because she is a rapid-fire unit, she will not see any real downsides in her Shinka stunning capabilities while being a weapon damage unit in comparison to being an ability damage unit. And when it comes to Umeko, at least in the beta, she was a lot like a Night Stalker hunter, and she made use of a scout rifle and a sniper rifle. Now, pretty much every single character in this game remained relatively unchanged from the beta to launch. There were some minor buffs and debuffs across the cast, and that leads me to believe that Estela's performance at launch will probably be better than how she was in the beta. However, Umeko, as another standout 4-star unit, may have seen certain parts of her kit tuned down, as she was another standout 4-star unit, a lot like Wolf. However, we won't really be able to tell until the weekly update and the start of the season tomorrow. But before you pull, you will have to remember a few things. One is that we are still very early into the game, and what that means is that we are all still really strapped for resources. If you've already been building multiple units, 3 or even more units, in order to make up for the acclaimed system, you may not have the materials in order to build either Estela or Umeko unless you are planning ahead for either of these units. Now what that means is that when you pull them, you may not be able to use them in a lot of the endgame activities unless you were saving up beforehand. Now they are providing some exchange boxes for Estela specifically that will give you a boost to the resources that you would need for her. The Solar Limited 2 mod bundle, I'd say, is definitely the worst one. It only gives purple mods and some mod components and glimmer. Basically everything here can be farmed infinitely, so it's a very low priority. However, there were 3 other boxes, one of which giving Luminites and Mythic Infusion Cores, another giving 42 gold sheaths, and another giving some gold sheaths and elemental fruits. I already purchased all of these in order to level up some of my other units, but I still have plenty of resources for Estela outside of certain things like incandescent clusters. However, when it comes to Umeko, there are no such boxes that are provided within the Efforts Rewarded shop. So if you're planning on building her, you will likely have to earn a whole lot of materials beforehand. And if you were looking for some tips on how to get more out of your pinnacle energy when you're searching for those materials, I definitely recommend checking out my How to Spend Pinnacle Energy Efficiently guide that you can find on my channel. However, when it comes to the weapon options for the 2 units, as we have been confirmed already, Estela will have the pulse rifle and machine gun, which means that she will share the exact same weapons as Caber. So if you built either of these guns for Caber, then you would be able to swap them over pretty easily to Estela. As it comes to mythic and exotic options, Estela will have some pretty decent ones. I will say when it comes to perks, the BVD4 Akutak is definitely significantly better than the Scorched Earth LMG, because it has access to Syncopation and Fire Rush. You can also use Vorpal Weapon if you would like more total damage, but Fire Rush will also increase the damage as well. But Syncopation is definitely one of the best passive damage increases in the game, and if you ever see this on a weapon, it's likely going to be a top option. However, when we look at the Scorched Earth, there aren't very many good options on this. You have Fraternity, and beyond that you have Kleptystra, which grants increased damage based on the ratio of hits to precision hits. It does look to be a decent damage increase, however not nearly as good or consistent as Syncopation. I wouldn't really recommend Glutton or Eager Aspirant, as Glutton will not work in the Expanse, and Eager Aspirant is just not really that great. When it comes to Mythic Pulse Rifles, neither of these I'd say are really stand out in their perk selections. They both have access to Steady State, which is a rather odd perk to say the least, because it's a gradual increase from body shot damage to precision shot damage, which if you're hitting precision shots will not provide you any benefit whatsoever. Reincarnation is a final blow perk on a timer, and I would much prefer a perk like Syncopation that would be a lot more passive and likely provide a much better damage increase more consistently. Ensured Yields is probably the best option here, however there aren't really many good options in the first node here. When it comes to the Ultimatum, you have access to Conjugation and Fraternity in the first node, however you still have that Steady State. Glutton, which would be a much better final blow perk because it's not on a timer, however it will still reset in the Expanse, and Kleptystra will provide you an actual scaling damage buff, but I wouldn't really say that either of these pulse rifles have any standout perks whatsoever on them, so in that case using Furious 3 may provide some extra benefit beyond using a Mythic Pulse Rifle, especially because you can get it very easily with the Battle Pass, unlike her Mythic LMG options, which I do not currently have, though we will have to test the Mythic and Exotic options on Estela anyway, regardless of how good or bad the perks are on these weapons. Now, when it comes to Umeko, she will have the same weapon options as Tantu. And what's been a rather strange thing that we found is that the Izanagi's Burden does not seem to be dealing very much damage right now. We don't really know if it was a nerf from beta to launch or if it's currently bugged. However, what we do know is that it's currently not dealing nearly enough damage at low investment, and by that I mean within its first Catalyst band, in order to keep up with mythic snipers that have decent rolls like the Maguichi with the Pranayama, which does seem to be the standout option among the mythic snipers, though I don't imagine the Sidereal Year will be much of a difference in terms of total damage or DPS compared to the Maguichi. When it comes to the mythic options, even though the DEL3 Lassie has some really good perks like Syncopation and even the Bear Approaches, I don't think it's really enough to compete with Allocation Vector alone, because this perk right here not only grants you increased DPS for your primary weapon, almost doubling it compared to most other options, it also increases your damage against rapid fire Shinkas. Yeah, at perk level 5, Allocation Vector is breaking rapid fire Shinka's shields as fast or faster than even rapid fire weapons like auto rifles, which is rather impressive for a mythic weapon. Polaris Lance is another option that I have heard is doing rather well, however I have not been able to test it myself as I do not have the weapon, so I cannot make any recommendations for or against it at this current moment. Now when it comes to artifacts for the different units, obviously Estela is going to be making use of a lot of the different summon artifacts that are available to us. And that includes Warding Pact, Nourishing Pact, Siphoning Pact, Bulwark Pact, Bellicose Pact, Rampaging Pact, Responsive Pact, and Resonating Pact. Now when it comes to a lot of these summons, we will have to do some extra testing to see exactly how a lot of these damage increases benefit or do not benefit summons. So once we get access to her, I will definitely be doing that very soon in order to give you some accurate information. And I will be triple checking everything, especially because I've become so acutely aware of just how easy it is for certain things to interfere, like perk levels, like certain attributes like ability strength, having incorrect descriptions where because supers are counted in this, it's not just signature abilities. So please don't take any of my please don't forget to scrutinize everything, including me, because I am still fallible. When it comes to Umeko, a lot of her options are going to likely be very similar to Tantu, except for she will have access to more tags. For instance, she will have access to movement ability, unlike Tantu, and she won't have as much uptime on her healing as Tantu would. Though, when it comes to a lot of her damaging options, I don't imagine that she's going to be very different from Tantu in her choices of artifacts. That's really all I have for this video. If you're enjoying my coverage of Destiny Rising and would like to see more builds, guides, and keep up with all of the news in the future, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. And if you're excited about Umeko or Estela, or even both, I would love to hear your reasons in the comments down below. I will still keep updating my artifact spreadsheet, and I will be providing artifact recommendations for every single unit, so make sure to look at that for the most up-to-date information beyond any video that I put out. And again, I'm still very new to all this, but I am working to do my best to improve with every single day and upload that I make. I'm definitely going to be a lot more careful in the future. I would like to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you next time.